I think, are we live streaming too? All right. We're going to wait till our live stream and I'll...
Question, this is being broadcast?
This is being broadcast live on YouTube and we are recording it as well. The camera is pointing at me though and not at the audience. All right, so hello everybody. My name is Ben Rhodes. I'm the watershed manager here with the Reston Association. I'm really glad you all could come out to this first Drainage and Erosion 101 workshop. Today we are here in person at the Reston Association Conference Center, but also online on YouTube, and this will be recorded for folks who were not able to join us. Quick at the top here, we'll have a Q&A at the end of all three of our presentations. We'll be up here ready to answer everybody's questions. It's going to be a lot of fun. And then I also want to recognize we have some board members here. So if you're on the Reston Association board, if you wouldn't mind raising your hand or standing. These are the folks who represent you to the Reston Association. Lori Dodd and Erwin Flashman. So if you have any pressing Reston Association questions and concerns, feel free to talk to your board members. But hopefully we'll help you address some of your drainage and erosion concerns with this workshop. So without further ado, here we go, maybe. Oh, can you click on the PowerPoint real quick? There we go. So like I said, my name is Ben Rhodes. I'll talk quickly about Reston's watershed context and why it's important to pursue these watershed drainage and erosion projects on your properties. Dan Schwartz is here with the Northern Virginia Soil and Water Conservation District. He'll talk about the landowner conservation programs and some resources that are available to you to help get these projects in the ground. And then Megan is here with our covenants team, and we'll talk about how the covenants department here at the Reston Association can help you out with these projects. And then, like I said, we'll have some question and answer at the end, both for folks here in the audience, but also for the folks on Zoom. So everyone will have a chance to ask any questions they might have. And then you might have noticed we have some great vendors, community partners, and staff in the back, as well as the lovely food for the folks in person. So after we're wrapped up with the presentation portion, we'll end the live stream and we'll be able to chat with our community partners in the back. So, the watershed team. Reston Association has a watershed department. It is Calvin Dickens in the back. Calvin's right over there, and myself. And what do? We do anything basically related to fresh, non-chlorinated water in Reston. All the chlorinated water, we can let our aquatics team deal with that. But the fresh water, our lakes, ponds, and streams, any outreach, maintenance issues related to those, we deal with. So if you ever have any questions, reach out to watershed@reston.org. So we have a watershed department, but why do we have a watershed department? What is a watershed? The reason we have a watershed department and not a lakes department is because, or a streams department, is because all of our lakes, ponds, and streams are impacted by what goes on in their watersheds. Watershed's just a body of land that all of the water that hits that body of land, runs down into like a basin into a stream or a pond. So we have a number of different watersheds in Reston that I'll talk about later. But basically, we all live in a watershed, right? No matter where you are, you're living in a watershed, water's running downhill. And, having a sort of a watershed brain really helps with understanding some of our issues that we have here in Reston. So where water goes in a watershed, I mentioned that it, flows downhill, but it doesn't all just flow downhill. It'll also infiltrate into your soil, which is a really important thing to understand, how water infiltrates into your soil. And it'll also evapotranspirate. Basically be taken up by plant roots and evaporated back into the air. And so we want to try to reduce the amount of water that's running off of our properties and improve the amount of water being evapotranspirated or infiltrated. So the watersheds in Reston, the larger watersheds that we have, essentially sub-watersheds of the Potomac River. We have Difficult Run, which makes up a good portion of our watersheds here in Reston, Horsepen Creek, which are little corners of Reston. Here, I can use our pointer. Horsepen Creek, and Sugarland Run watershed. Colvin Run, all of our lakes are in the Difficult Run watershed. And then we have, zooming in a little bit, we have our lake watershed. So Reston, has 4 lakes. About a quarter of our households in Reston, 5,000 plus households in Reston are inside of the watersheds of those lakes. So a quarter of our homeowners, cluster communities, those folks are impacting by what they do on their property, are the health, directly impacting the health of our lake. So it's really important to be mindful of that. You can see here that Lake Newport is overlapped with the Lake Ann watershed, and that's because all the water from Lake Newport runs into Lake Ann. You can see here that the Lake Thoreau watershed is overlapped with Lake Audubon because the water from Lake Thoreau runs into Lake Audubon. And then you have to remember that your neighborhood has a watershed of its own. So here's an example of a neighborhood in Reston. They were having a issue down here by the road where all of their water was running into and having a hard time identifying how to solve this issue. There's tools on the Fairfax County website. There's experts like myself, Calvin, and Dan, who can help you map your watershed in your neighborhood. So if you have a drainage problem for your cluster, for your neighborhood, we can find where the contributing watershed is, and you can start doing outreach with your neighbors about how you can collaboratively solve some of those issues. So the issues we have in Reston's watersheds, one of the biggest issues is the quantity and velocity of water. Basically, we have a lot of impervious surfaces, and so when we have big rainstorms, which are increasing every year, the number of big rainstorms we have, the water is moving faster and with more quantity, which means that it's going to have a lot more power to erode soil. It's going to pick up soil particles with it much more easily and have a lot more energy as it moves downstream. We're having a lot of issues with salt pollution. Salt is toxic to a lot of freshwater organisms, and so as our winters become a little bit more haywire, and folks, we have a lot more thawing and refreezing. Folks are using more salt, and so we're having a lot of toxicity in our streams from salt pollution. Lawn maintenance issues, things like leaf management, blowing leaves into the street can cause nutrient pollution and can also just block up drainage, as well as fertilizer causing nutrient pollution in our streams and sediment pollution. We have a great example right here on Lake Thoreau of just some chocolate milk in our stream. And I walked upstream and you could see the areas of lawn that didn't, or the areas of what was meant to be turf were just bare soil. And here's that upstream area right there. So these are the kinds of issues that you as a homeowner or a cluster leader, you don't want, bare soil. This isn't attractive, but also it's impacting Reston. You don't want water pooling, and so this is why it's important to, pursue some of these drainage and erosion projects that we're going to be talking about. But it also impacts the whole community, and these are collaborative efforts. This is why we need to work in common towards watershed goals, because we have things like that water quantity and velocity issue carves out our stream channels, and so the county has to pursue stream restoration projects as all of that sediment and nutrients from fertilizers, lawns, grass cuttings, leaves, as those enter our lakes, we have increasing algae blooms along with the increasing temperatures that we have year after year are fueling these algae blooms. And so if we can reduce pressure on our lakes, reduce pressure on our streams as a community, we're going to be able to solve these kinds of problems collaboratively throughout our watershed. But zoom out even further, we are part of the Potomac River watershed, like I mentioned. This is the 2022 Chesapeake Bay watershed report card, and you can see here the Potomac River has a D+, out of the whole bay, Chesapeake Bay estuary. All of this water that's coming out of Reston is ending up in the Potomac River and in the Chesapeake Bay. So the nutrients that it's carrying with it, the eutrophication, is impacting the Chesapeake Bay as well. So, you know, we are focusing on your property. This is all just to say we're focusing on, you know, your properties as homeowners, as cluster leaders, but what you do on those properties has a grand impact throughout our region. So what you can do, you know, these are just some quick things that I'll go over, but Dan will have some more detail about specific projects. But preserving natural forested areas on your property, on your cluster's property, using responsible stormwater practices at home, limiting fertilizer use, picking up your pet's waste, anything that is basically going to wash downstream, trying to keep it in place. So, like I said earlier, preserving and planting. Here you can see an area of Reston Association property that we had to replace the bulkhead on, and in the process ripped up a lot of plants in a traditional landscaping bed. That was replaced with a natural meadow, and you can see the amount of plants here is really going to help and has helped reduce erosion. You can see the channelization in some of these spots here after a rainstorm. All of these plants are going to help us reduce erosion and hold that soil in place. One of the quickest and easiest things you can do as a homeowner is if you have a downspout directed into an impervious surface, onto your driveway, or into a ditch, like into a concrete ditch. If you can direct that downspout into a lawn area, if you have some healthy turf that can accept that downspout, disconnecting that downspout goes a long way into helping our watersheds, reducing that quantity and velocity of water. Keeping an only rain down the drain mindset, not blowing your leaves down the drain, your grass clippings, picking up after your pet. Reston Association works with the Soil and Water Conservation District to mark our storm drains to help folks remember that. And then call an expert. I am available, as well as Calvin, to help folks sort of triage their drainage and erosion issues on their property. I meet one-on-one with residents all of the time to help with these issues. And then we have the Soil and Water Conservation District, who will introduce themselves in a little bit, who are available to you as well. So there are experts that you can talk to for free as Reston Association members who can come out before you start talking with contractors to help you figure out more green ways to deal with your drainage and erosion problems. So without further ado, I want to pass it over to Dan Schwartz to give his presentation. I thank you all very much.
Thanks, man.
Here you go.
All right, good to see everybody this evening. As Ben said, my name is Dan Schwartz. I'm the soil scientist with the Northern Virginia Soil and Water Conservation District. And I wanted to tell you a little bit about our office and some of the homeowner, or landowner, I should say, conservation programs that we have available to offer assistance to property owners and managers throughout Fairfax County. To kind of build on what Ben was talking about, there's been a lot of changes to our landscape over the last 75 or so years. This is Lake Ann. This is what Lake Ann looked like in 1960. There was no Lake Ann. There was just forest. The Dulles Toll Road wasn't there yet. I think they were building Dulles at this point. Perhaps it was open. I'm not exactly sure when that happened. But basically what you were looking at is forest and farmland. As we jump ahead a couple of years, in 1972, we see the first core, the historic core of Reston being built. We move forward to the 1980s. Not too much more development in Reston in the 80s, but to 2002, basically all of northern Reston is developed. And by 2023, we have the current landscape with the three visible lakes up there, Lake Ann, Lake Newport, Lake Fairfax, and lots and lots and lots of those impervious surfaces that Ben was talking about. And just a totally different landscape than it was even back in the mid-century mark of last year. So we went from, up till the 1960s or so, Fairfax County was actually the leading dairy producer in the state of Virginia. And now we're home to a little over 1.2 million people. So the land changed significantly as a result of the conversion from agriculture and forested areas to I wouldn't even say suburbanized, much more urbanized landscape that we have nowadays. And you can see that change in Reston as well, too. We've got obviously the Dulles Toll Road corridor with high-rises going up, parking lots, lots of imperviousness. And then we've got areas like around Lawyers Road or some of the very northern parts of Reston, which are still, significantly forested, not too much impervious surface, lighter development. So we've got kind of the whole gamut here in Reston currently. If we were to pull out Reston and look at it on the impervious surface map of Fairfax County, that's us right there. And again, you can see when we're concentrated around the toll road, we're getting to 50, 60% on average imperviousness. As we go to the far northern and far southern parts of Reston, it gets down to more 5 to 15%. But still, there's no part of Reston that's totally undeveloped. There's a lot of people living within all of our watersheds. And as Ben said, this creates a lot more runoff with all those impervious surfaces there. So this is the same illustration that he used. Basically, when you're putting an impervious surface down, and that refers to anything that doesn't let water pass through, concrete, asphalt, rooftop, things like that, it's like putting a cap on the soil. The soil is our original water quality device. That's our original stormwater pond, for lack of a better term. How did we clean our water in the past? We did nothing. We just let it soak into the ground. And when this was all forested and all agricultural fields, it was very easy to do that. When we have impervious surfaces lying on top of the soil, the water can't access that soil, it can't absorb down into the soil and be filtered, and as a result, it just becomes surface runoff, and anything that's on the surface, the salt that Ben was talking about, fertilizers he mentioned, and other things, litter, garbage, stuff like that, it all gets washed down into our storm drains without having any pre-treatment, any filtering through the soil. I wanted to talk about one other thing that's a little less visible, but also extremely important when it comes to suburban and urban water quality, and that's soil compaction. So we do have, in Reston, plenty of open spaces as well, too. Some of those open spaces are very natural. Some of those open spaces are not so natural. What we have a lot of, which is kind of an invisible imperviousness or an impervious light, is compacted soil. Your healthy soil, at least the topsoil, will be only about 50% solid material, which is quite a bit less than most people think. The other 50% of soil is pretty much divided evenly between air and water. So about a quarter of the volume of soil is taken up by air and oxygen at any given time, and the other quarter is taken up by water. However, when we develop a site, we bring across heavy equipment, we compact that soil, we pack it down, we tend to squeeze out a lot of the pore spaces that allow for all that air and water to get in the soil in the first place. So a developed soil will basically be compacted and those pores will be squeezed out. So maybe when we formerly had 50% pore spaces, now maybe it's 10, 15, 25%. That loss in pore space represents a loss in the potential storage of oxygen and water in the soil. But more importantly, for water quality even, it reduces the ability of air and water to get into the soil in the first place. So that's why I call compacted soil sort of impervious light. When we squeeze out those channels, those pores in the soil, we're squeezing out the ability or the possibility of water soaking into the soil in the first place. So what generally happens is when we have that compacted, well, here's an undeveloped soil. Soil is made up of these things called PEDs, which are basically the scientific term for a visible clump of soil. In an undeveloped soil, those PEDs are fairly loosely held together, meaning there's pretty big pore spaces between one PED and its neighboring PED. And inside each of these soil PEDs, there's small pore spaces that are sort of like little capillary pores or wicking pores that soak up water and oxygen and hold it against the pull of gravity. Well, when we compact soil, we're basically putting a really heavy weight on top of it and squeezing it down, and that squeezes out especially those big pore spaces. And we get this compact looking kind of platey soil over here. It still has PEDs, but those PEDs are tightly squeezed together against their neighboring PEDs, and those big pore spaces that used to exist between the two of them are now either non-existent or much smaller. And as a result, when that same rainfall falls on top of this compacted urban suburban soil, a fraction of it soaks into the ground, but a lot of it just stays up at the surface. And if your lawn or your property is a little bit sloped, then it becomes surface runoff. So when we're looking at a landscape of current day Reston, and this is Reston Parkway at South Lakes Drive, to really understand what's happening with our water, first we have to pull out all of our impervious surfaces, which around here in this pretty developed intersection right next to us is a sizable amount. But then we also have to add to that all those areas of soil that are very close to foundations and roadways and sidewalks. I can't guarantee all of that soil is compacted, but generally speaking, a good rule of thumb is the closer the soil is to the foundation of a building, to a paved sidewalk, or to the edge of the roadway, the more likely it is to have been stirred up during the development process and compacted. So we add all that compacted footprint, and sometimes it can be as much or greater than the impervious footprint of the development in the first place. But we're talking about even more sources of runoff, stormwater runoff, than we might imagine if we were just looking at the impervious areas, the paving, the roadways, the sidewalks, and the building rooftops. And as Ben mentioned, the more impervious surfaces you have, the more compacted soil you have, you're going to get more runoff. Without a suitable flow path for that runoff, meaning a good drainage swale through your yard, a dry creek bed, a nice grassy wide swale that can conduct that water to where you want it to go, there's going to be some issues with all of this increased volume flowing across the landscape. Erosion is the most obvious issue, but sometimes it's flooding if the water is pointed towards your house. And sometimes it's just waterlogging, consistent sogginess on your soil for days or sometimes even weeks after a rainstorm. And this again is a sign of compacted soil. If you've got a very flat landscape, a very flat lot, not much of a grade, water falls on it. If you have good soil structure, lots of pore spaces, that water is going to soak into the ground relatively quickly, usually within a couple hours after a rainfall. If you have compacted urban soil, that water just has nowhere to go, so it may just sit there as a shallow puddle on your property for, again, hours to days to sometimes even weeks in worst case scenarios. And of course, this can cause your grass to die as well too, other than just being an eyesore. Another issue that we're having, which this change is actually a good change for the most part, but it does have an effect on erosion and soil quality, is increasing shade. So a lot of our clusters, our townhouse communities especially, when they were built, a lot of the trees had to be cut down to make way for the construction machinery, to make way for the footprint of the house and the driveways and sidewalks and roadways that would service them. So this is the Cabot's Point cluster, and it was built in the mid to late 80s, I believe. So this is an aerial photo of it from 1990, and you can see got a lot of areas of grass there, and we've got quite a few ornamental trees that you can see dotted around, which are still kind of in shrub shape at this point. They're small, not quite seedlings, but certainly not grown. We fast forward 33 years, and what happens? Well, good stuff. The tree canopy begins to grow and expand, and those trees get much, much larger. Again, this is a good thing. The net effect of this is very, very good. But the issue is that's a lot more shade, a lot more canopy, a lot more areas that are shaded out by leaves than there were before. And because we often rely on grass to be our ground cover, turf grass to be our ground cover, turf grass grows very well in sunny conditions. It does not grow very well in shady conditions. Now, as our tree canopy is maturing around what used to be new development, is now mature development, we're getting a lot more shady areas, and as a result, it's a lot harder to grow grass in some areas. This is often compounded by the fact that a lot of the grassed areas in our tighter clusters, think of condos, apartments, and townhouses, they're also walkways. You have that little grass alleyway between two sticks of townhouses. That's often used as the walkway for people to get their garbage cans from the back of the house to the front on garbage day, or sometimes it's just a way for, say, contractors or kids to access the backyard. So we've got a lot of shade, which isn't good for grass. We've got a lot of foot traffic, which isn't good for grass. You combine those two together, we get a lot of instances like this, where we got these formerly nice, fairly lush green alleyways on our clusters around here that are now getting to be very, very bare. You see patchy grass growth. You see more erosion because the less vegetation you have on the surface, the easier it is for any runoff that passes over that surface to wash water away, to wash soil away. And it's just an eyesore as well, too. And it can be a muddy mess both outside and inside the house. If you're walking over this, you're probably going to be tracking some mud back into your house as well, too. These are all Reston photos as well, too, from years of site visits. But there are fixes to this. So I don't mean to say at all that good canopy growth is a bad thing. It's a good thing, but it can cause some issues, especially when you're using those grassed alleyways as footpaths. Those are the problems that we have. What are some of the solutions? And I'm not saying that my office has all the answers, certainly, but we do have these 3 programs available now that offer assistance, both technical and in some cases financial, some cases both, to landowners within Fairfax County, and of course any landowner within Reston as well, too. That's the Home Turf Program, which we run collaboratively with the Master Gardeners. It's really the Master Gardeners program. We help them out a little bit, but they run it for the most part. And the two programs that fall under our purview are the Residential Technical Assistance Program, call it the RTA, and then the Conservation Assistance Program, or CAP. So I'll go through those one by one. The first one, the Home Turf Program, again, it's a program of the Master Gardeners of Fairfax County. It's opening up for new applicants starting on May 15th, and the application window is open till September 15th. When you apply and you are received into the program, it means that a team of Master Gardener volunteers will come out and visit your program. They will use their wheel measure down at the bottom to measure the size of your lawn, identify the types of grass and weeds that are there. In my case, more weeds than grass, but that's all right, it's still green. They will collect soil for testing, send that soil off to the testing lab at Virginia Tech, and once they get the results back, they will create a nutrient management plan, basically a fertilization and liming plan for your lawn. So this is a really good program for people who have lawn and want to keep it as lawn. Because, you know, from an environmental perspective, lawn is not a great thing, but what's worse than a lawn is a bare, patchy, poorly growing lawn. So as Ben said, when you don't have good grass growth, when you've got bare patches of soil, whenever water flows over that soil, that lawn, it's going to pick up a lot more sediment, erode it away, and wash it down into our streams and our rivers. If you have a really lush, dense lawn, not a speck of bare soil around, lawn does a very good job at holding the soil in place and creating that vegetated carpet over the surface that prevents the sand, silt, and clay particles underneath from eroding away. So if you want a lawn, the best thing that you can have is a healthy lawn, and the Home Turf Program and the Master Gardeners will help you get there. Where my office is involved is we, in certain cases, especially when a lawn is close to or within what's called a resource protection area, which is kind of like a conservation easement around a stream, we will review the nutrient management plan and make any recommendations on top of what the Master Gardeners recommend. So again, the Master Gardeners run this by far. You know, they do 98, 99% of the work, but every now and then one of these projects comes to us for a review of some of those more sensitive areas that they're working in. And I will have URLs for all these programs up on the last slide, so you can copy those down. Now for the Residential Technical Assistance Program, that is basically an advice program. You can get free technical consultations with our staff. Sometimes that's done on site, sometimes that's done over phone and email. But it's a way to sort of pick our brains, if you will, about your drainage problems, your erosion issues, sometimes even your landscaping issues as well too. We've been doing the Residential Technical Assistance Program since the 70s. We've got a whole file cabinets full of old site visit reports going back to the early 70s. So it's been a pretty popular project. In 2001, we launched an online service. Well, it's online for us. We can see all those little dots on that map there show people who have contacted us for technical help over the last year and a half. So it's a pretty wide-ranging program, and of course it is open to anybody in Fairfax County. It can be a little confusing to folks about what residential technical assistance actually is. So what this program does is it helps you to diagnose your problem. Say you have a drainage or erosion problem, but you're not exactly sure why. We can help you find the reasons for why. It suggests solutions. We often suggest several different solutions, from more complex to more simple, and you can kind of pick the one that works best with your budget and your aesthetics, what you want your property to look like. We also do provide second opinions as well too. A lot of people will contact us after getting some bids from contractors, not to necessarily contradict the contractors, but ask us as a non-interested party, what would you do in this situation? Does this make sense to, put a French drain here? And we will give our opinion with obviously no profit motive in mind, and then they can use that to either negotiate or tweak the bids that they get from their contractors. Just as importantly is what the program does not do. We can't take sides in disputes, unfortunately. A lot of calls we get are people angry at their uphill neighbors for sending their runoff down there. I can tell you for a fact there's very little regulation about runoff. There are just a few things that you're not allowed to do, but in most cases, if your neighbor is sending runoff to you, chances are it's not a violation of any county code. We're a non-regulatory agency. We're not even a county agency. We're actually independent, so we can't cite anybody for a violation. If we see something during our site visit that clearly looks like it might be a violation, we'll certainly suggest, well, maybe you want to talk to Fairfax County Code Compliance, or maybe you want to talk to somebody at the Reston Association to see if there's something actionable that can happen. But for the most part, most of the things we see are perfectly legal. They're not violating any rules, It's just if you're the downhill landowner, unfortunately, you have to deal with your uphill neighbor's runoff, and there's not much you can do about it. This program also does not provide grants. This is an advice program. We're basically telling you what you can do on your own property to help solve your problems. Now, the next program I'm going to talk about, CAP, is a grant program. And certainly if we're out there as a representative of the Residential Technical Assistance Program and we think we see a project that would be really eligible for the CAP program, we'll mention that to you. So sometimes we do use, I shouldn't say sometimes, often we use this program as a vehicle to guide people to our grant programs, but it itself is not a grant program. It's just advice. This is a really good program if you're not sure where to get started. And that's where we get a lot of people coming to us. We have a problem, we don't know why, we don't know how to fix it. That's what the RTA program is for. It's also a very wide-ranging one. So we will tell you both what we think is the best solution for you, the cheapest solution for you, and also we can give you the most environmentally sensitive solution, which often is not the best or the cheapest, but some people really want to do what's right for the environment. And if they want to spend a little bit of extra money on that, we're not going to get in their way, of course. Now, the one that everybody likes because there is some money attached to it is the CAP program, the Conservation Assistance Program. It is a grant program for projects that have these two important characteristics. A project that will solve your drainage or erosion problem while also benefiting local water quality. So it has to meet those two considerations. So a French drain would not qualify. That's a means of getting water off your property. Sometimes that's perfectly fine, sometimes that's what you need, but it doesn't benefit water quality. What benefits water quality is usually keeping water on the property, allowing it to soak into the ground, or otherwise filtering that runoff before it flows into our streets, onto our sidewalk, and out to our storm drain system, into our streams and rivers and lakes. As a result, there's only certain types of projects that will qualify, but it is open to just about anybody at this point. At first, when we launched it, it was really mostly just for homeowners associations and clusters, then it expanded to include individual private properties. Now it includes individual private properties, clusters, so if you want to do something on the common land of your cluster, that would qualify, as well as places of worship. So if you've got a drainage erosion problem on your church, your mosque, or your synagogue, the CAP program can be used as well too. It can't be used on commercial and unfortunately cannot be used on apartment property as well too because the county considers that commercial. But condos, as long as they have common land, can apply. These are all the potential types of projects that the CAP program can provide reimbursement grants for. Conservation landscaping, rain gardens, and bioretention. Bioretention is just a name for a large, fancy rain garden. Dry wells and infiltration trenches. An infiltration trench is just a large, fancy dry well. Permeable paving, impervious surface removal, rainwater harvesting, cisterns, green roofs, constructed wetlands, vegetated stormwater conveyances, which are kind of like a long, linear, it's almost like the love child between a rain garden and a drainage swale, if you will. And living shorelines, which we haven't done any of yet because it has to be tidal waters, which there are not any in Reston, there are a few in Fairfax County. Limited appeal here, though, so far. What I'm going to talk about, though, instead of going through all of these things, are the most popular ones. Conservation landscaping, rain gardens, dry wells, permeable paving, and impervious surface removal. And include a lot of photos as well, too, because I always like to see things visually. By far, the most popular project that the CAP program has granted in its first 7-8 years of existence is conservation landscaping, which is our term for basically taking an area and converting it to a very densely planted bed of native plants. So the specs for this program, or for this type of project, is that the conservation landscaping must replace an area that is currently in turf or bare or patchy soil, or an area where there is excess runoff. So even if you have good turf, but you've got a lot of runoff passing through your property during a storm, that still would be an area that you can apply for conservation landscaping projects. All the species used in conservation landscaping has to be native to Virginia. It doesn't have to be native to Fairfax County, although we do push people towards locally native plants. But if you have a favorite plant that grows out in Southwest Virginia, you can use that here as well too. So it has to be a Virginia native. It can be, conservation landscaping can take the form of a meadow. So if you sprinkle, clear the area and sprinkle seeds and grow a thick meadow, that's applicable. It can be a tree planting program, or it can be a mulched bed of a mix of trees, shrubs, and ground cover. The planting density for any of these must be high. If you're doing a tree planting program, we have specs for how close those trees have to be planted together. If you're doing a mulched bed, which is our most popular type of conservation landscaping, we want to see basically 75 to 90% coverage of plants in the footprint of your conservation landscaping when those plants are mature. So basically, if you're looking down at the top of your conservation landscaping from a bird's eye view, 75% of that footprint should be taken up by leaves, roots, stems, and the like. So you have to have that high planting density to, again, hold the soil in place and soak up as much runoff as possible. These types of projects are cost shared. It's a reimbursement grant, so you have to install it and pay for it and then come back and have it inspected and cost shared by us. We provide 80% cost share up to a maximum of $7,000. So go quite a ways with that. So some examples. This is the Vienna Community Center. It might be a little hard to see for those of you in the back, but they had a nice, it was functional, but not too pretty grass drainage swale running by their ball fields. You can see those 3 big culverts popping out of the ground right there. A community group converted this to a really nice conservation landscaping, and that's what it looks like now. That's actually about 2 years ago, so it's grown thicker since then. And right around now in springtime, it's just a riot of birds, bees, pollinators, and color. This is a private residence in Vienna. It was very steeply sloped backyard that slopes towards the back of the house. They had really good canopy coverage here, but as a result, all the grass that was on the ground had pretty much died off, and there was a lot of bare soil. They converted this into a really nice conservation landscaping. That's one of our showcase pieces for what you can do on a private residence. This is the Towns at Waterford here in Reston. They had a pretty bare slope, again, partially due to really high canopy coverage, and they converted it over to this really pretty mulch bed of conservation landscaping. And that was about 2 years ago, and that's filled in quite a bit since then as well, too. And then lastly, I've got another Reston project here. This is the Lakeport cluster right by Lake Thoreau. This is a nice project because it shows how conservation landscaping can have a bit of a structural element as well, too. They were planting, unfortunately, in a very tight and very steeply sloped spot, so it was hard to get plants in there. So what they did was they made terraces out of coconut coir logs, so coconut fiber logs, and they used those to sort of stair-step the slope. They backfilled behind each of those terraces with planting soil, and they planted it very densely. And they actually ended up putting some gravel down on the bottom side as well, too, for whenever water does spill over the terrace, it won't cause erosion at the base of each of those terraces. So kind of an interesting way to kind of combine a more structural project with a planting project. But we consider that conservation landscaping, and it's still eligible for that 80% cost share up to $7,000. Rain gardens. Our second most popular project after conservation landscaping. A rain garden is basically a sunken garden that holds water on its surface and holds it there long enough that it can soak down into the ground. So this is a really nice project in that it reduces the volume of water that's leaving your property because it's holding that water in place and soaking it into the ground, which is where it would have gone before we put up all of our impervious surfaces and compacted a lot of our soil. The specifications for this are that the rain garden has to be sized to capture and treat the volume from a 1-inch rainfall. Basically what that means, and we have some fairly simple spreadsheets on our website where you can do these calculations or we can help you do them. Let's say you have 500 square feet of roof draining down to a downspout, and you want to connect that to a rain garden. Basically, you have to multiply the square footage of the roof by 1 inch and figure out the volume in either gallons or cubic feet of water that will be coming off that rain, coming down that downspout during that 1-inch storm. It sounds a little complicated, but the spreadsheet makes it pretty simple, where basically all you have to do is figure out how much surface area is draining to your rain garden, and is it impervious surface or is it soil? And if you know those two things, you can click those numbers into our spreadsheet and it will spit out the volume that you need to capture. And then you can kind of play around until you find the rain garden size that will hold that volume. Suitable soil. You need soil that does not have shallow bedrock, does not have shallow groundwater, and is fairly porous, meaning it allows water to fairly quickly percolate, absorb down into the subsoil. Fortunately, not all of us have that. And unfortunately, well, a lot of what my job is over the last couple of years is going out to people's properties who want a rain garden and telling them, no, I'm sorry, it's just not gonna work here. But at least there are those balances in place, those checks in place, because what we really don't want you to do is put in a rain garden that eventually just becomes a permanent puddle. And you also have to have a proper offset from your home. Generally speaking, you want your rain garden to sit at least 10 feet away from your home, because what a rain garden is, it's a way to collect water and soak it into the ground. You don't want that happening right next to your foundation, because some of that water might find its way into your basement. So set it properly away from your home to make sure that the water that does soak into the ground doesn't make its way to somewhere where you don't want it to go. If you can meet all those considerations, just like conservation landscaping, the CAP program offers 80% cost share up to a maximum grant of $7,000 for your rain gardens. There are two general styles of rain garden. So if you're lucky enough to have good soil that doesn't have shallow bedrock, shallow groundwater, and is fairly porous, you can do this very simple rain garden where you basically dig out what we call the ponding area. This is the sunkenness. This is the depth that the rain garden sits below the surface, which basically becomes the depth of the puddle that forms on the rain garden during a storm. It's usually 6 to 12 inches. The water sits there, it's held, and it's allowed to soak down into the ground. If you've got pretty porous soil, and there's tests you can do to figure out if you have that soil, all you have to do at that point is take compost and till it into the soil to make it even a little bit more permeable. And then basically that is your simplest style of rain garden. So you've got your 6 or 12 inches of ponding, you've got another 6 to 12 inches of amended soil amended with compost down below it, and then you plant that surface very, very densely with water-tolerant native plants and layer it with mulch. That's a simple as it gets rain garden. More complex rain garden is what we call a full excavation rain garden. This is for you folks who don't have highly permeable soil. In this case, what you do is you actually take your existing soil and you dig it out. You excavate it and you replace it with an optional layer of drainage gravel down at the bottom, embedded with an optional underdrain. And then above that, we have commercially purchased rain garden soil that comes from quarry companies. Some landscape companies around here offer it as well too. It's basically 85% sand, and the rest is topsoil and compost. So the topsoil and compost provides enough organic matter to give the plants a nourishment, while the 85% sand allows for very quick infiltration of the water. So if you've got kind of dense soil that doesn't percolate well, this might be what you have to do. Obviously, a little more intense, a little more expensive, a little harder to build, but often a smaller footprint as well too, so that can be useful. So pictures, I always think pictures are useful. This is a homeowner rain garden in the Tyson's Corner area. This is what it looked like before. They were going to put it next to their deck to capture 2 downspouts worth of runoff. This was a full excavation rain garden because they didn't have a very good percolation in their soil. There you see the excavation. They've layered in the drainage gravel down at the bottom. Now they're filling it in with that rain garden soil, that 85% sand soil. And there you see it all mulched and planted. And there are the 2 downspout pipes coming in, protected with a little bit of gravel to make sure they don't cause erosion on the surface of the rain garden itself.
How deep was that excavation?
That one was probably about 3.5 feet. That was a little bit deeper than typical. But they were trying to get a good bit of volume in a fairly small footprint. Here's an even bigger one. This one was to collect all the runoff coming off of a whole stick of townhomes, so about 8 roofs of townhomes, and some runoff coming off the parking lot in front of them as well too. This was a bit of a hybrid project, so the community used contractors to do the excavation, but then they actually did most of the rest of the work themselves. So there's the contractors doing the final digging. They did it both by hand to kind of finish it off, but most of this was done with an actual machine. And there's the community members themselves. They're raking in that 85% sand rain garden soil. They went ahead and planted it as well too with community labor. And this is it in action. It's working pretty well. This is one of the first rain gardens that we put in through the CAP program. That was installed in about 2015. Now, next one is a dry well. I'd say 80% of our projects are conservation landscaping, or 70% of our projects are conservation landscaping or rain gardens. Dry well is sort of a distant third or fourth, if you will, but we still put quite a few into the ground through this program. Dry well is a really nice project if you don't want to change the look of your landscaping, because it's basically all buried below ground. What it is a buried pit of gravel. You run your downspouts or other concentrated pipe sources of runoff to that gravel, you let it spill into the gravel, sit there for a little bit, and then percolate outward and downward into the soil below. So just like a rain garden, the specs are the same. It has to be sized to hold the runoff from a 1-inch storm. You have to have that suitable soil, no shallow bedrock, no shallow groundwater, and good infiltration. And you need, again, that proper offset from the home, at least 10 feet. If you got all those things, then a dry well is certainly a possibility. And again, the cost share is the same as for rain gardens and conservation landscaping, 80% of costs up to a maximum of $7,000. This is a really big dry well. Most of them are not going to be this sized. This is about as big as you'll see a dry well get. There's the excavation. That's them filling it up with gravel. That little white pipe there is what we call the monitoring well. It's kind of a perforated pipe that goes vertically down into the dry well, so you can unscrew the top and look inside to see it's draining correctly. They filled it up with gravel and they wrap a filter fabric over the top to prevent fine sediment from getting down into that gravel and clogging it up. Now they're pouring topsoil on top of the sediment and they've covered it up with sod. So once the sod really grows in and kind of connects with the surrounding grass, all you really see is the top 6 inches or so of that monitoring well sticking up out of the top. Everything else about the dry well is down below ground. So it's a nice option for people who have a landscape that they like and they don't want to change it very much, but they do want to soak up some of that excess runoff. Here's a little bit more of a homeowner scale dry well, one that we more typically see through this program. This is just capturing the runoff from one downspout off the back of a home in Reston over by the Ring Road area. So they put the downspout into a catch basin. That catch basin led to a long white PVC pipe, which eventually led to this little cute dry well over here. And they actually put in 2 of these drainage barrels. Those are open bottom barrels that basically just give you a little bit more storage per square foot than the gravel will. That's an option. Some people do put those barrels and then they surround them by gravel. Some people just use gravel without the barrels. But this is a good scale, a good idea of the scale that we see for small residential dry wells that are capturing 1 or 2 downspouts worth of runoff. I'd say our third most popular project, and it's been picking up in popularity recently, is permeable paving. And just as the name implies, it's the replacement of impermeable paving, asphalt and concrete for the most part, with a material that will hold the weight of a car or whatever you're putting on top of it, but allows water to soak down below. Most permeable paving that we have done is in the form of these sort of brick-like surface pavers. Unlike bricks, though, they have a fairly large gap between each of them, and in that gap, rather than mortar or stone dust, you put porous gravel. So the pavers themselves generally are not porous. It's that gap between one paver and its surrounding pavers that allows water to percolate into the ground. What's really important about the porous paving is what's underneath, and that's anywhere from about 1 foot to sometimes 18 or 24 inches of gravel bed down below. And that's not to hold up the weight of the paver, although it does that as well too. That's to hold the volume of water that passes through. So in a way, it's kind of like a dry well that just spread out over a very wide footprint. The specs for this is that you have to follow the manufacturer's installation and maintenance guidelines. And what I do warn people about is that the maintenance is quite a bit higher than it is for standard paving. You do have to vacuum sweep the pavers every now and then. You will have to most likely replace the gravel between the pavers from time to time, because if you don't, fine sediments and organic matter will start building up in those cracks and they can often clog. So it is a pretty project. It's a really good project in terms of water quality, in terms of reducing stormwater volume, but it does require quite a bit of maintenance. So just a warning for those of you who might be considering it. Also, when you apply, we want to see the plans either stamped by a professional, it could be an engineer, or it could just be a certified porous paving installer, or you have to sign a waiver of liability saying, I haven't gotten them signed by a professional, but I'm willing to go forward and take the risk.
Out of curiosity, for new installation, what are the costs of something like that?
I'd say in many cases it can be 2 to 3 times as expensive. But they do, I'll show you a couple pictures, and people do like to put them in because they do look quite a bit nicer as well too. As a result of the expense of the project, we also cost share this one at a higher level. So $14 per square foot up to a maximum grant of $20,000. And the nice part about this is that square footage is the impervious area treated. So let's say you take 2 downspouts and now you run them to your new permeable paver. Let's say you're draining 1,000 square feet of rooftop onto your permeable paving. You get cost share for the footprint of the permeable paving itself and also for the 1,000 square feet of rooftop that's now draining down to that permeable paving because it's being treated by that permeable paving as well too. So a lot of people bump up their cost share by running their downspouts to the permeable paving, and that's kind of an easy way to get a larger grant. This is one of the largest permeable pavings we put in through the grant program, and you can see a very long, very sloped driveway. Looks a lot nicer as a permeable option. This was an expensive project. I think this was about $60,000 in total, but they did get a lot of reimbursement as well too. But it doesn't have to be a large-scale project, and it doesn't have to be a driveway either. So this is a person in a townhouse in next to Tyson's Corner who decided to take out their concrete patio and replace it with a permeable paving patio. And they have their downspouts running to it as well too. So not only is it soaking up the rainfall that falls directly onto it, it's soaking up their rooftop runoff as well. That's the smallest permeable paving that we've put in, but a very nice example and a good example for those of you who have smaller properties. And here's a brand new one that we put in just about a month ago. This is a property in Great Falls, and they did the first grid paving system. And a grid paver is basically, it still has that, foot or so of gravel underneath, but rather than the permeable pavers on top, what they do is they put in this plastic mesh grid. And then they can fill this either with gravel or with, some people put grass in there as well too. They do have the traditional permeable paving on the side as kind of a border. But they decided to do this one just with gravel, and that's what it looks like as a finalized project. And basically, the mesh holds the gravel in place and prevents it from being compacted and reducing the permeability of that paving system. And this is still expensive, but a cheaper way to pave and to use permeable paving on especially a large driveway. Question in the back?
Yeah, what's the growth frequency of weeds and stuff and something like that?
This is the first one we've done, so I can't quite say.
Leave it in the permeable acre.
If they're not maintained, if the fine sediment is not taken out of those gaps, you will see, in some cases, weeds start to pop up. But usually by the time that happens, it's a clear sign that recurring maintenance has not been occurring like it should be. So it does happen, but generally for ones that are not maintained well.
How maintenance depends on the environment it's in.
Oftentimes we will direct people away from permeable paving if they have a really heavy tree canopy around, just because you're going to have a lot of vegetative matter falling down on the surface during the fall. So it is a better project for more open areas. And that's not to say that you can't do it. It's just there's more maintenance involved. Question in the back?
The permeable pavement portion just needs to handle the runoff, so you could probably isolate the driveway area of permeable and surround it with non-permeable still. Is that how they are still able to do that?
They are still able to do that. I didn't put it on the slide, but as long as you're handling the 1-inch rainfall, you can sort of tweak the plan as much as you want. So there have been people who have a permeable paving that runs all the way up to their foundation. We do recommend, again, a 10-foot setback from soaking water into the ground from your foundation. So they'll put an impermeable liner underneath their permeable paving on the first 10 feet. So then it, in effect, becomes somewhat impermeable, and it spills into the permeable section. So there's many ways to skin this cat. With a creative contractor to help you, it can happen.
Not much winter left around here these days, but we all pass those driveways that are super steep and think, oh my God, HVM in the winter. I assume those are a lot better for traction.
It can be, but we also don't recommend salting them or sanding them. So in some ways, having that long, steep driveway may not be the best application for permeable paving if we do get one of those winters where we get a lot of snow.
The general rule of thumb is if the slope is more than 8%, it's probably a more expensive system because we have to set it below and it's a little bit more complex and that's the cost. So you want this flat.
Yeah.
And if you're wondering why she knows so much about permeable paving, that's Adele Kuo from Deco Footprint, and she has put in several permeable pavers as well as many different types of cap projects. So she's familiar with the program.
Start getting suspicious.
I'm just going to make
We
a
got
quick
ringers in the back.
comment. Thank you for your questions, but the audience that's listening in Zoom can't hear the questions unless you have a microphone. So if we could hold questions until we're done with our presentation, we'd appreciate it.
Certainly can, certainly can. All right. The next one I wanted to talk about is impervious surface removal. Exactly as the name sounds, it's taking an impervious surface and taking it out, just taking it out and replacing it with some sort of vegetation. That can be grass or that can be native Virginia plants. You want to remove the paving as well as the gravel underneath. Whatever gravel subbase is there generally gets pretty compacted. That all has to get removed. You do have to amend the soil, mix in compost or other things to loosen the soil up and get some fertility back in the soil. And if you can do all of those things, you can apply for impervious surface removal. So here's a good application of it, a small one where a person removed a fairly unused and pretty poor condition concrete walkway to the back of their house. That's what it looked like before, during the removal, and they decided to turn this into a conservation landscaping project. If you do conservation landscaping, meaning a plant with native plants afterwards, you can actually double dip. That would be a double program. You get paid for the impervious surface removal, and you can get a grant for the cost of the conservation landscaping as well, too. For the impervious surface removal itself, we reimburse at $5 per square foot with a maximum grant of $20,000. Here's another pretty creative one where a person had a driveway. They wanted to keep their driveway, but they didn't need it as long as it was. So they decided to chop off the last 25 feet or so of their driveway and turn it into permeable walkways and conservation landscaping. That was one of our more creative projects. Now, one of the issues with all of these practices, the permeable paving, the rain garden, the dry well, all these practices that rely on getting water to soak into the ground, you do need a suitable site. And unfortunately, sometimes that can be hard to come by because we don't always have great soil around here. Generally, suitable soil will have an infiltration rate, meaning the ability to soak in water at greater than 0.5 inches per hour. So if you have just sort of a column of water sitting on the surface of your soil, it should dissipate at least half an inch per hour to be suitable for these projects. There's some wiggle room there, but that's a good general rule. You want from the bottom of your dry well, rain garden, or the bottom of the gravel on your permeable paving system, you want that separated 2 feet from the top of the groundwater and the top of the bedrock. Many of us can meet that separation. Some of us, unfortunately, cannot, depending on where you are in Reston. We do have areas of high groundwater and high bedrock. And all practices, except for conservation landscaping, are not allowed within resource protection areas. And again, resource protection areas is that 100-foot, for lack of a better term, conservation buffer that surrounds lakes, streams, and other perennial water bodies. For Reston in particular, for the Design Review Board, if you're not sure you need an application, the general rule is when in doubt, fill one out. It's better to put in a project and put in an application to the DRB that's not necessary than to build the project and then find out you're in a violation. How do you find out if your site is suitable? We do often rely on the homeowner themselves to do a simple infiltration test, basically digging a hole, filling it with water, and seeing how quickly it dissipates. There are instructions on our website for how to do this. There's even a video starring yours truly on how to do this as well, too. Riveting watching. You can consult Fairfax County's online mapping system. They've got a really great kind of online geographic information system called JADE, where you can layer a lot of different geographic layers on top of each other and make your own custom map. JADE will show you, includes layers for resource protection areas, floodplains, which sometimes, in some cases, you do need special permissions to do even environmentally beneficial things in floodplains, and also the soil types. So you can at least get an idea of what your soil type is and where your bedrock and groundwater might be and what your infiltration rate might be before you even put a shovel into the ground. Sometimes looking at the soil type is enough to tell you that, no, this is not going to be a good spot for a rain garden. There's a picture from Jade showing Lake Ann, and those green areas are the resource protection areas that surround the lake and also the streams that are feeding into it. All projects that receive funding through the CAP program have to be maintained for 10 years as well, too. We do inspections throughout that decade. We are giving money to private owners. We want to make sure that the projects that are being funded are also being maintained. I did want to do a little teaser. This project isn't ready for prime time yet, but we're going to have another grant program coming up. It officially starts on July 1st, but frankly, it's going to take us a month or two to really get it up and running. It's called the Flood Mitigation Assistance Program, FMAP. Can't be a good bureaucrat without having a lot of acronyms. It's going to be like our conservation assistance program, but instead of stormwater controls, it's going to be for flood mitigation practices on your own property. So things like waterproof window wells, it's things like putting waterproofing on your basement, raising up the level of your outdoor air conditioner. So if you do get flooding, it doesn't flood out your appliances. Flood gates, more structural stuff on the house itself, but it will also apply to things like regrading to push water away from the house as well too. When it's up and running, it's going to offer 50% reimbursement for projects up to a maximum grant of $5,000. We don't have a URL for it right now, but once it's up on July 1st, you can go to the county website and either search for Flood Mitigation Assistance Program or just type in FMAP on the search bar and you will get to it. And these are the URLs for all of the projects or programs that I just mentioned. Home Turf up there at the top. General Technical Advice, our residential technical assistance program, does not have a website. Basically, we ask that you send an email to us at conservationdistrict@fairfaxcounty.gov, telling us, a brief narrative of what the problem is, send us a couple photos of the problem, and give us contact information for you as well, too, so that our staff will be able to get in touch. The Conservation Assistance Program is fairfaxcounty.gov/soil-water-conservation/VCAP. Not the best URL, but also if you just go to fairfaxcounty.gov, hit the search bar and type in Conservation Assistance Program, it'll take you right there. So I'll leave that up for a little bit so that hopefully you can get those URLs down. And I'm going to throw it over to Megan.
Let's see if I can work this thing. All right. Building on all that fantastic information from Dan and Ben, I wanted to offer a covenants perspective on covenants administration, what we do, who we are, and how we can help you with your next drainage and erosion concern or project. First and foremost, one of our functions is simply to connect you with the right person, resource, agency to help you with your question or your project or your problem. And sometimes, as such, people contacting covenants administration don't even know which member of our team to contact. So we do have this dedicated email address, cov@reston.org. You should feel free to use it regularly and often to stay in touch with us. So the mission of Reston Association's Covenants Administration Department is to foster and promote the attractiveness and quality of life of the Reston community by administering fairly and consistently the adopted guidelines and covenants related to design, maintenance, and use of residential and certain commercial and non-residential properties. That is a mouthful, and it can also be a very complex mission, which is why our team absolutely prioritizes demystifying and uncomplicating covenants-related requirements, regulations, design guidelines, and particularly the design review process. Reston purview includes 22,000 residential and non-residential lots, 137 cluster associations, 33 condominium associations, and 4,000 plus single-family detached properties. So that's a lot of lots. That's a lot of property. The department works to educate and support RA members by navigating the design review and resale processes. We also work to foster the relationship between RA and cluster and condominium and sub-associations, providing information to simplify the operation of your sub-association and meet the needs of your membership. Many people don't know that our department is further divided into 3 sub-teams: our compliance team, our design review team, and our outreach team. Oops. There we go. So meet the team. Our department director is Cam Adams. Then we have our community compliance manager, Sandra Kalina, LaShonda Graham, our community standards manager, myself, the community outreach manager, and Lauren Freer, our administrative assistant. Our functions related to compliance, covenants enforcement team supports Reston Association's covenants and legal committees, and is responsible for conducting all mandated compliance inspections. That includes and is primarily resale inspections. Our design review team supports the DRB, the Design Review Board, and is responsible for reviewing and scheduling all DRB application submissions, in addition to serving as covenants property advisors for commercial and non-residential member lots. And finally, our outreach team is the first point of contact that you'll have when communicating with our department regarding your property. Outreach team members, covenants advisors, are responsible for processing DRB applications, assisting with closing out citations or violations issued upon resale inspection, and facilitating communication with sub-associations, plus responding to all covenants-related inquiries. So, how can we assist you with your next drainage and erosion project? It's critical to note that the vast majority of drainage and erosion projects in Reston will require design review board review or submission of a DRB application. Dan said it, we didn't even ask or tell him to include that in his slides. When in doubt, fill it out. So you should plan to be in contact with your covenants advisor early and often, even in the conceptualization phase of your project, to just talk about the scope, requirements, and overall get a sense for what the DRB process involves. Submission package and review timeline will depend on the nature and scope of your project. So that's another thing that your covenants advisor can talk you through. And I should say that these projects that we work with our membership to process, support, and push through the DRB process are not just submissions from individual member property owners, but of course, sub-associations, cluster associations, condo associations, working on a drainage and erosion project on their common ground. But one of your first questions will inevitably be, how long will the review process take? It does depend on the details of your project. Applicants are encouraged to collaborate with their covenants advisor. Again, early and often, we're here to help, educate, and answer your questions. But just to get a general sense, typical supporting documents for your drainage project will include a written description of the project. And of course, as you might imagine, since so many of these projects are involving water and multiple properties, scale drawings and renderings of your proposed improvement, but also a site map. Where are you pushing the water? Where will the water inevitably go? These things are all going to be critical to compiling together into your application to assist the DRB in evaluating your project. And of course, covenant staff works closely internally to evaluate and support your drainage project and question concern. Compliance conducts inspections to confirm conformance and or issue violations. Design review, of course, works on processing and scheduling DRB applications for your drainage project. And additionally, inspecting your project post-design review to confirm conformance with whatever decision the DRB rendered on your project. And then, of course, outreach is available to educate, answer questions, and just generally assist with helping everybody to understand how the process works and how your project can work within the process. And with that, now we can start our question and answer period. We can field questions both via Zoom and in person. I know that we do have a walking microphone, so I would ask that, I think if you're on Zoom, just raise your hand, and if you're in person and you have a question, please just raise your hand and we'll get the mic to you.
Hi, how are you? My name is Brian Maxtroth. I'm the Covenant President for Concord Green. My question is mostly for Ben. regarding some Reston Association property that appears to have some pretty bad drainage issues, most notably the Lake Newport soccer field, which has been dumping lots of water on certain residents of our community. We've had, Larry Butler, when he was acting CEO, out, and also some people from the Fairfax County also take a look and identified that there was a drainage problem there. A few proposals were talked about, but in the end, nothing was really done. And since Larry Butler has moved on, it seems like we just kind of keep going in circles where we send out emails to Reston Association, and there's some discussion back and forth, but in the end, nothing really is done about the problem.
Great, yeah, let's connect after this question and answer period. We have a representative from our capital project staff here who all three of us can chat after our Q&A, but that is certainly a great example for everybody of some of the complicated drainage and erosion issues that we have in Reston. In that area, we get a lot of runoff from VDOT right-of-way, as well as Reston property, county property. And so some of these problems can kind of come together, and it does require a lot of follow-up to have some of these solved.
All right, thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely.
We actually did do some work over there. We put a dry well in, some berms, and some piping to redirect the water. So if you want to get with Ben and then contact me, I can show you what we did.
I can't hear you.
Sorry.
All right, any other questions? Yep, someone in the back there.
Hi, I was wondering about the retention, not a retention pond, but a dry well that I put in a couple of years ago with Reston approval, by the way. First of all, can you get retro funding for it?
No, unfortunately not.
But the outlet from that is I've been building a ball garden, if you will, and could certainly use help with that. Is that something that would be applicable to your program?
Sure, that could fall either under the conservation landscaping banner, or potentially, if it's really wet, we do have something called a constructed wetland, which we have not done any of those projects yet. It does rely on a very specific type of soil, which is usually wetter than what we have around here, but there's always a chance.
Perpetually wet.
Okay, well then that might be an option. But the nice thing is both of those are applicable, and both of them have a lot of overlap. So if one doesn't fit, the other one should.
Right. Thank you.
Welcome.
Hi, first off, I'd like to thank you all for doing this tonight. I'm Lynn Farabent, I'm with Solar Edge Cluster. I have a couple of questions. One, we have a 10-foot easement between us and Barton Hill that stormwater drains run the whole length of our development and the one behind us. When we moved in 40 years ago, there were trees providing canopy. And actually, we had more grass under the trees than we do now that the trees have unfortunately been diseased and had to take down. What is, my recollection is we're not allowed to build anything or do anything on top of that easement. So what are our options if it is with the county? There is no grass back there right now, or very patchy garbage. I believe that's the county.
Yeah,
we have been.
If it's a stormwater easement, it would be the county. There's a branch called the Maintenance and Stormwater Management Division. They have their a contact number up online for their general info line. You can contact them. Generally speaking, you can plant on top of these easements. There's two types of easements. There's, kind of a drainage swale, which allows water to run over the surface, and then there's an easement on top of the buried pipe down below.
That's what this is.
Okay, so generally there's not that many restrictions on what you can do on the surface, as long as it's not a particularly deep-rooted plant that might send its roots down into the pipe. But what I've been told sort of informally is as long as the plantings aren't blocking the water flow, it's fine. But I would check with MSMD, Maintenance and Stormwater Management Division, first to make sure. But chances are you can plant on top with some restrictions on the type of plants used. Usually not, full canopy trees and the like. The other issue is there's always the chance that if something goes wrong with the pipe, the county will come in and have to fix it. And because it's an easement, they have the right to go in there. All they will replace is grass. They will replant it afterwards, but they won't replant with what you had there necessarily. They'll replant grass.
I would just be happy if grass would grow there.
Sure.
Okay. The second question is, there is a Reston path between us and Villa Ridge on the north side of Solar Ridge, south side of Villa Ridge. There's quite a bit of runoff that comes down that path. What are our options for Reston in helping to divert some of that runoff?
Yeah, another item where we can follow up on figuring out what the best option on Reston Association property will be. Oftentimes, these cluster associations will be surrounded by Reston Association property. And so we'll have to figure out where that runoff exactly is coming from and partner on a solution there.
Thanks.
Yeah, great. Now I have
Can we take
Solar
a
Ridge written down.
question from Zoom? I see Jan. If you want to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yes. If there are, in a condo association, for example, if there are large areas of erosion and runoff that need to be addressed, and we're talking fairly significant areas, would each of those be a separate CAP project or only one CAP project?
It somewhat depends. They can be separate, and depending on the number of people who live in your condo association, if it's a larger one, meaning over 50 residents or 50 living units, I should say, yeah, you can apply for up to 5 CAP projects. We basically allow a CAP project per 10 residences with a max of 5. Having said that, sometimes a project will be combined. So usually what we like to see is one project address one problem. So if you have an area of runoff that's causing erosion, we don't want you to break up that area of erosion into 2 different parts and then apply twice. But let's say you have downspouts on the left side of the property that are causing erosion and downspouts on the right side that are also causing erosion, but they're 2 separate areas. That would be a good double project. You could apply once for the left side, once for the right side, because it's sort of a different area of problem, if that makes sense.
It does. We have a fairly, shall we say, mature canopy here. And as a result, there's a lot of basically mud underneath them and causing runoff down the hill that's pulling away all the dirt from around our tree roots, which are a couple 100-year-old sycamore type trees. So that's where my question lies.
Sure.
I can reach out, I guess, separately.
Definitely. And, if you're not exactly sure what the solution might be, I might push you towards the residential technical assistance first, because then that way you get a site visit and we'll kind of guide you towards what might be possible. And if a CAP project looks suitable, we will certainly let you know.
Contributor for the Federalist.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi, guys.
All right, we'll go to Sarah McHugh on Zoom.
Hi there, and thank you very much for this important discussion. I have 2 questions. One is, weren't the lakes initially established to be mitigating the stormwater runoff? And if not, are they going to be swimmable at any point? Is that a priority? So I'm just trying to understand, are they lakes? Are they stormwater runoff sources? And to what extent do any of the new condo and apartment complexes are required to have any permeable solutions, right? We've got a lot of development going on in Reston, lots of new surfacing with, traditional ways of just barreling over these precious land areas. So is anything innovative going on with these new condo and apartment complexes to stop this runoff? Thanks.
Yeah, that's a great two-part question. So first, regarding the lakes, that's my favorite question. Are they lakes or are they stormwater retention ponds? Why not both? They do provide a lot of great recreational opportunity for folks. They act as stormwater retention ponds, but any lake is going to act as a stormwater retention facility in the situation that our lakes are in, which are in these urban areas as impounded streams. So they're never not going to be stormwater retention facilities. They're always going to capture stormwater and slow it down, and their value as in doing that will never change. As far as being swimmable, we always try to maintain our water quality as well as we can. But because of that nature as accepting stormwater, it's always difficult to determine even hour to hour what that water quality necessarily is going to be. With regard to new development in Reston.
If I could, how many lakes are swimmable right now? Are they ever?
We don't allow swimming for a number of reasons, and we don't test for the ability to swim in the lakes. There's different state regulations with bacterial load with regard to the swimmability of lakes, and so we do not necessarily manage or test them as swimmable. But that is not necessarily a black or white issue, yes or no. And then with regards to the development around Reston, a lot of those things are not within the Reston deed. Anything within the Reston deed obviously is going to go before our design review board. And outside of the Reston deed, our Reston Association certainly advocates for as a sound of environmental review as can happen with those plans. And maybe Dan could talk a little bit about new development and requirements for stormwater on new development.
So it's often invisible because a lot of the more urbanized development puts their stormwater controls underground. But basically, the state minimum standards say you have to not absorb all the runoff, but have to filter at least the first inch of runoff and control the quality of it, and in some cases, the quantity of it as well, too. So for a lot of these high rises, more dense development that we see going in, either around the toll road or elsewhere, a lot of them have huge underground cisterns or other storage chambers that are holding their runoff. Just won't be able to see it from the surface. A lot of them have green roofs as well, too, which you wouldn't be able to see from the street, and that's filtering the runoff that falls onto the roofway. So there is a lot of work that goes into them, but again, a lot of it is not really visible to the average visitor of these sites.
Awesome. Can we take a question from the audience that's here in person? Next question. Carolyn?
Quite a few.
Okay.
First. You next?
No.
I'm David Barker. I'm with Pinecrest Cluster. I really appreciate this event. This is perfect timing for us because we've been in a multi-year process of trying to install native plants throughout our 8 acres. Well, we have about 4 natural acres, maybe 4 acres of townhomes. I have 2 questions. One is about the dry wells. How applicable would those be for townhomes? We have 220 townhomes. We don't have a lot of land on each of those. Is there something we could put, small dry well per downspout, front and back? And my second question is about the drainage in some of the natural areas surrounding our buildings of between 2 and 8 townhomes. We've been trying to classify those as natural areas and treat them as such. And just slowly start introducing native plants to those. And we've already been, for 2 years, removing invasive plants like bamboo and English ivy this year and other ones next year. So my 2 questions are the dry well and what processes can we take to handle large natural wooded areas that better handle drainage and erosion?
To the dry well question, unfortunately, the answer is maybe. Again, it can be a little difficult on townhome properties just because they're so small. You still do want that 10-foot setback. So if you have decent soil, it's generally the soil gets worse the closer you get to the house, just because the closer you are to the foundation, the more likely the soil is to have been disturbed and compacted. But that's not to say that's not a blanket rule. Sometimes you will find areas of good permeability close to a house, but you still want to have that 10-foot setback as well too. And in some cases, the property may be so small that it doesn't allow for that 10-foot setback from the foundation. But if you can get those two things, then it's definitely possible. The other issue I would mention with townhomes or any dense development is utilities. There's lots of buried utilities, cable, electric, gas, and they tend to get more dense, obviously, the closer the houses are together. So you do have some strikes against you, but if you call Miss Utility, you find a spot on the property where there are no utilities running through, you can get the dry well 10 feet from the property, from the foundation, and you get that good soil, then it is definitely possible. Another thing we've seen is sometimes clusters will put a larger dry well or a rain garden on the common land and then work with homeowners to get permission to run the downspouts from those homes directly to that dry well or that rain garden. Because oftentimes you'll have a little bit more space to work with in the common land, and it's also set back further from the houses. So there's options, but it does take a little bit of finagling with the neighbors to make sure that, you know, multiple private property owners are on the same page.
Can we go to Carolyn? Did you still have a question?
Yes.
Can we get the mic to Carolyn? You're welcome. And then we'll go to Diana on Zoom.
Thank you, Carolyn Kirby with Walden Cluster. And thank you for putting on this workshop. And because I've already participated through Ben Rhodes' assistance, Megan, Cam, and Richard's steering me to the VCAP and the soil and water staff. Excellent program. So my question is, this is an enormous challenge and there's lots of need, I believe, and I'm already in the queue to get another consult, site visit. But my question is, are you all being, quote, pardon the pun, inundated with requests? Do you have the staff? Are you growing? Is the budget growing? How are you able to cope with all the demand?
We are growing, and the budget has grown. So we get some of our cap budget from county, some of it from the state. It used to be our maximum reimbursements were $3,500 for most of those projects. We've doubled them to $7,000 as a result of the greater funding we've been getting. And it used to be that we would run out of funding every year. And the last couple of years, that's not been the case. We've had enough funding at the end of the year that anybody who applied and successfully put in an application did receive funding. And we should be growing by one more Conservation Assistance Program staff person by July of this year. We are looking soon to hire. So right now I work with the program, but we have 2 dedicated staff for the program. We should have 3 by this summer. So that's, you know, not a huge number, but a big increase, 50% increase from what we have now. So that doesn't mean that we'll necessarily be able to get out to each site visit within, you know, the week that the site visit request comes in, but we do hope to shorten wait times a little bit with the higher staff numbers.
Follow-on question with the young lady there. You have a finite budget. You have a whole list of people coming at you. What is the process if you got more people than money on picking and choosing the projects that you're going to be spending money on?
There's no easy answer to that, I'm afraid. It's just prioritization. And frankly, it can be difficult to work with clusters and homeowners associations because sometimes we have 1 or 2 residents either on the landscape committee or on the board that are really gung-ho, and the rest are tepid. So sometimes we get all the way to the design phase and the project falls through just because there's not enough support. It's hard. Honestly, you have to have a champion, usually a champion on the board or on an official committee like a landscape committee to get these projects through. And if you don't, a lot of them do fall by the wayside because oftentimes, you know, an erosion problem here, a drainage problem there is not the top priority for the cluster. And I can certainly understand, you know, there's other things that take precedence. That's not really an answer because there isn't really an answer from what I've seen, unfortunately. But I'd say it's been getting somewhat easier because I think just the attendance at this workshop shows there's a lot of interest in this problem. And there's a lot of people who are getting knowledge as well, too, and learning how these things work and how these solutions work. And that's creating more advocates out there than there were even 5 or 6 years ago. So all I can say is good luck. I hope you find the people who will push the project through, but you really do need those local advocates on the ground in order to get these things to fruition.
All right, let's go to Diana and then Bert.
Okay, thank you. So I may have answered part of my own question. By the way, I'm glad to hear that you're getting more staff and resource and money. That's great. In the past, you used to have meetings for professionals, and I think I went to the website, and it looks like that's been totally superseded now by online webinars and a test. Is that correct?
That is
correct. Or has there already? Okay, there's no more live meetings then.
We haven't really had one since the pandemic, and we found that most contractors, especially in the spring, landscape contractors, I should say, are so busy that they appreciated having that online option where they could watch the training videos anytime that they had free.
Okay, that's great. Thank you, Vera. That was my question. Thanks.
Thanks.
All right, Bert.
Hi, thank you. This is fascinating. I am from Chestnut Grove Square, which is a 19-acre condominium community, one of the oldest in Reston and right next to your new luxury hotel. So we'd like to maintain what we've got. Is it possible to get a list or some guidance on what other condo associations have done, especially those that have the buildings scattered around beautiful courtyard areas the way we do and wooded areas surrounding? And also, just so we can get our curiosity of some people who don't know about this, get their curiosity going and some enthusiasm. And also, what happens at 10 years if the project's not still there?
I'll answer the first question first. Yes, I hope you got my email address at the end of my speech. If not, it's dan.schwartz@fairfaxcounty.gov. I would encourage you to send me an email, and I can send you a couple example applications that other condo associations have successfully installed. Most of them were conservation landscaping, but there are a few other ones that were something different. I don't think we've done any condo associations in Reston, but we've definitely done some in other parts of the county. And as for the 10-year maintenance agreement, basically we prorate the cost of the grant that we give. So let's say someone maintains their project for 8 years and then for whatever reason decides to put a parking space over top of it. We've never seen that, but it could happen. We would then request, since you maintained it for 8 years, to return 20% of the grant to us. What we have seen is that some people sell their property. If they sell, they have the option. There's a state form where they can transfer maintenance responsibility to the new owner. Obviously, some people, new owners, don't necessarily want that responsibility. And if that's the case, then the homeowner who's selling can either return, again, whatever that prorated amount of cost share is, or, this would be a little odd, but they can agree to maintain it for whatever the remaining years of the contract is. Now, if you're moving to Arizona, that's not going to make much sense to you. But if you're moving down the block, crazier things have happened. Maybe you want to take a trip back to the old house every 2 weeks and weed the conservation landscaping. I'm not saying many people would take that option, but it is an option out there.
Okay,
Awesome.
thank you.
Thank you. So we have time for one more question, and then Megan is going to send us off.
And could I just add one more thing quickly to Bert? Bert, your first question is also a great question to direct to your condo dedicated covenants advisor, who would be a great resource for projects in Reston that might be analogous to yours and helpful to you.
All right, any last questions? Going once, going twice? All right, Megan, do you want to send us off? Oh. You're the last person. Can we get the mic to her so that everyone can hear?
So one thing I've noticed in my cluster, and I live in Golf Course Island, is that sometimes when we have these heavy rains, I actually can't tell if where the water, like the water goes from my house to the cluster to, I think, the golf course maybe. The golf course gets extremely flooded, and I've noticed that like the creek bed has actually widened, and I can see where like the banks have fallen down. But then back at my house, the water actually is over the drains. So I get the impression that something in there is clogged up somewhere, but I don't know where, and I can't tell whether it's my house, the cluster, or the golf course where this backing up is coming from, and so I don't really know where to go with that and who to contact.
If it's a storm drain issue, I would contact the county first, because generally those big storm drains, even on private property, are county infrastructure and county maintained. And even if you're not sure, you can contact them and say, here's where I live, the drain is behind me, give it a rough description of where it is. And they'll be able to tell if it's their infrastructure or not. And if it is, you can put in a sort of a work notice, and they will come out and check to see if there's any clogging in it. It could be, in some cases, a lot of our pipes are only sized for the 10-year storm, basically meaning they handle a certain volume of water, but for those really intense storms, they will back up. And if that's the case, there's not much that can be done. But if they go in and they find a clog, they will certainly clear it out. In addition, there was that JADE mapping system I showed. You can go on there, and there's actually a stormwater layer. And there's also a stormwater ownership layer, so you can figure out where the publicly owned storm drains are. And if it's the county, you can find that out and contact them.
If it is a question of them just not being able to handle it, then you can't, there's no way to expand the drainage that already exists?
There is, but at great cost. And frankly, if the overflow itself isn't doing much damage, you'd be very low on the priorities. Just, certain amount of money out there to maintain this stuff. And, the top priority is things that are threatening flooding of structures or damage to structures or life and limb for that matter.
Thank you.
And for sort of like miscellaneous stormwater questions like that around Reston, my email is watershed@reston.org. I'm more than happy to do some of that JADE digging for you and come out and take a look and try to help you connect with the county and whoever you need to connect with.
So with that, I think we're going to wrap up. Thank you so much to everybody participating, both in person and online. Thank you very, very much to the district, to Dan, to Ben, Watershed staff. We have a number of, yes, big thank you. We have a number, for those of you attending in person, we have a number of other partner agencies and vendors in back. Please take a moment to check them out. A very important show note as well, that all of this information that was shared online, to include the slide deck and the recording of the presentation, will be available, posted on the Cluster Resource Hub. And if you provided your email address when you signed into this event, we'll also send a recap email around linking to all that material. And finally, a big, 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 big fat stormwater-soaked thank you to our Covenant staff that really helped to pull all of this this event together tonight. So thank you. Thank you.